Welcome to the Catholic Midlife Podcast, where we address the challenges and the opportunities of midlife from a uniquely Catholic perspective. This is the time, my friends, for a deeper renewal of your Christian vocation. Come and enter into the freedom of Christ that allows you to be the person you were created to be, because there's an amazing, awesome, exciting next season of life waiting for you. Hello, and welcome to the Catholic Midlife Podcast. It's 2024, and
Yay.
We are Karen and Curtis here to celebrate with you.
That is outstanding, Karen. The other day, we were visiting with a lady that had taken your self-compassion class. And
Right.
Karen, I was pretty moved, actually, by her appreciation of the class and said how it had really shifted some important things in her life.
What I loved about that conversation, if it's the one I'm thinking of, is she was teaching it to her spouse.
Oh, that's right.
I thought that was beautiful.
That's right. Karen, I think our listeners after this episode, the next Christmas season, are going to be singing, Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, you'll go down in memory.
Oh.
What do you think?
I don't know.
Yeah, today, my friends, we're talking about time and the way we mark time and the passage of time. That's kind of inspiring us. So here we are in 2024, and we're saying, holy cow, it's 2024 already.
I know how time flies,
Yeah.
right? It's true. It's true. And there's a lot of other things, right, that we say about time, like time is money. I have to make the most of my time.
Yeah, wasting time.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
about time.
It's about time.
I'm like this, living on borrowed time.
I'm running against the clock.
Time will tell.
I'm making good time. There's all sorts of things that we say about time. And today we're reflecting on, how do we think about time? Why do we say these things about time? And how does how we think about time influence what we actually do in time? You know, I'm not sure, Curtis, I've ever seriously considered how I think about time until now, at least not in any way that makes me intentionally change how I think about it. But I'm struck that it's really important what we think about time, and it can determine a lot about what we do.
Karen, as we've studied these materials, I've reflected that, boy, we are completely controlled by our unconscious minds. Our culture really is driving us in our attitudes around time. We are so stereotyped. So let's go through some different ways. And I think maybe our listeners will start to hear or see how true this is, that we just have one little way of thinking about time, but there's a lot of different ways we can think about it.
Sure. Well, one thing that you were sharing with me, Curtis, a little while ago was that really prior to the Judeo-Christian framework, most cultures thought about time in a cyclical manner.
Well, this is a criticism, really, I hear from certain secular sources that, oh, gee, back in the old days when life was great, time was cyclical. But now those Jewish people and those Christians, oh, well, they introduced linear time. And now we all have to make progress and we're marching through time. And it's not like the good old days when we kind of chilled and viewed time as this big cycle.
Interesting. Well, what it makes me think of is, when you think about time in this just cyclical manner, just going around and around and around in the same way, it's like it's not really going anywhere. It doesn't have a purpose or meaning. Whereas I do think the Jews and the Christians introduced this idea that history's going somewhere. Time is going somewhere. There's a teleology here. We have a purpose. God has a plan. There's somewhere we're all going together and somewhere that we're meant to be versus not really going anywhere or doing anything.
Karen, we're so deeply ingrained in this time is money, time is a commodity kind of thinking.
Yeah.
It's hard for me to think of it in any other terms. So this linear concept of time, is that it? That time is money, time is a commodity? How can we think about this differently?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's not how the Jews and Christians have thought about time historically. It's like linear time has been kidnapped by technology and progressivism and seeing it as a commodity. But for the Jews and the Christians, there was this transcendent aspect to linear time. And this really comes through, I think, when you look at, for example, Augustine, who says, God created time out of love. And it's not meant to be time is this limited thing that contains us versus eternity or divinity. His point is God created time out of love as a means for people to enter into his reality. It's a way into eternity versus being at odds with eternity. So it has this transcendent aspect. And so for Jews and Christians, time has always been infused with this capacity to open us up to the beyond.
Time is a participation in eternity. It's something God made for us so we could do that. And that would be in contrast to maybe Greek ideas that there's no time with God. You just sort of blink into existence with him, your soul, and that's it.
Right.
But the Christian hope is connected to this idea of time.
Yeah. And there's this way for the present to connect with reality wherever it shows up in the timeline. Like the Jews had this beautiful, beautiful concept of memory and remembrance, of making realities present in this moment, regardless of when in time, per se, they happened. And it's not anything like this functional idea of trying to dig down into time and having a factual understanding of this happened and then that happened and then this happened and then that happened.
Memory and remembrance versus fractionated, choppy time.
Yeah, exactly. So there's the capacity in any moment for deeper realities to be present in and emerge in time, which is really quite a sacramental approach to time, being imbued with transcendent realities.
The sacramental flavor of time is a big clue to how we are misunderstanding it. And I think the importance of linear time is that, well, it's not cyclical. It's coming from somewhere and going somewhere. There's a purpose. But again, our modern mindset has turned it into a thing. It's a functional commodity. And time is losing its sense of purpose when we functionalize it, when we commodify it.
So, Curtis, what are some of the things that we might think or say about time that would give us a clue into, really what we're doing with it and what we're buying into about it?
I don't have time. I don't have enough time. I don't have time for that. Time, it's like I'm at the mercy of time. It happens to me. There's kind of a victim mindset, like, well, these things just happen to me and I run out of time.
Sure. So it's something you have or you don't have, and probably you don't have as much as you think you need.
Yeah. And they are doing something.
Yeah.
That's preventing me from making the best of my situation.
Right. So I don't have enough time. That's pretty much a commodity approach, don't you think?
Yeah, that's completely a commodity.
Yeah. How can I get more time? What about I'm racing against time? I'm fighting time. It's me against time, and I have to fight back or compete with it.
I have to push back.
Yeah.
I have to rage against the night.
Yeah. Or, win the race against time to get something accomplished.
Yeah, so that's a very fighty or it's a very competitive outlook as well.
Yeah, certainly I'm not experiencing time as my friend.
Or maybe I'm competing against you. It's you versus me, and I'm going to take advantage of my time and, make you do those other things so I can have more of my time.
Right. Right. So, would you say that's a commodity approach or just a
It's sort of in that
approach?
same basket.
Yeah. Yeah. Or I'm trying to maybe maximize it all, but there's I have to fight against you to get what I need.
It's very much a zero-sum approach.
Sure.
Let's see what else. There's time is limited, and so I cope, right? That's life. Deal with it. You're tolerating the situation, and it's fine. And I'm just trooping along. And
so I might say something like, well, there's only 24 hours in a day.
Yeah, well, there you go.
There's only so much I can do. But in this case, though, I'm still experiencing it as a limitation. Time limits me versus, say, eternity, which is not limited, or something transcendent, which is not limited.
Yeah, that doesn't sound like participating in eternity.
Right.
24 hours a day. See you later.
Mm-hmm. I'm not really having the sense, again, that time is on my side.
Oh, time is on my side. Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we can be great servants, and we can be very positively motivated. I'm using my time for service. I'm doing the best I can. I'm doing my best. I'm stepping up, and I'm contributing as much as I can. I'm this happy servant.
Yeah. I think there's sometimes almost a perspective you hear in Christian circles. Well, it's a virtue almost to use your time well, to be a good steward of your time, to maximize your time on behalf of service and on behalf of others.
Well, there's a lot of truth in that. And like all virtues, there's a vice end of it. And you can have too little, just the right amount, or too much.
Right.
And this idea that I'm giving my time to others, I'm optimizing my service, it can carry us away if we're not aware of how we think about time.
I think there's kind of another way where we can enter into time where we're really experiencing it as a gift or an opportunity. I can sort of be at a point where I trust, hey, there's going to be enough time. I can relax. I can work with my time. I can even sort of be creative and let go a little bit and let time take over.
I love that saying. I saw this on a poster at some service help desk or something, and I was so distracted by reading the poster that the lady had to be like, "Excuse me, sir, can I help you? Can I help you?" And the saying is, the past is gone. The future may never arrive. All we have is now. That's why they call it the present.
Oh, the gift aspect.
The gift aspect. So it's getting into this idea that you're talking about.
Yeah. So honoring the present moment without being pulled into regrets for the past or worry about what's happening in the future.
Honoring, participating. There's some different words here to describe this relationship with time.
Yeah. Yeah. It's almost like in this perspective, time is my partner and we're moving through it together in almost a collaborative way.
Sometimes we experience time standing still, if you will. Mountaintop moments, like something of great beauty. We're swept up into the moment and we feel somehow we're connected with the eternal. I think of splendid vistas in nature, or maybe very sweet moments in our life, or moments of great hilarity when all of a sudden we just feel like, oh, we have a different perspective. We have a more eternal perspective. It's that idea of time standing still. We can also experience time standing still when we're super focused. We like to talk about flow, being in the flow when your time passes very quickly and you're doing hours of work or effort or something without even realizing it because you're so enjoying or swept up into the moment.
So that sounds a lot like participating in time, in the present moment, but not in a way that's limiting, actually in a way that's expansive.
Well, it's letting go of time as a commodity, or at least as an enemy.
Mm-hmm. Curtis, I want to share this quote by a Catholic philosopher, Ferdinand Ulrich. And he says, "We fill up time as if it were a blank sheet, and we spend it in order to balance out or cover the ought of our daily demands and achievements. That is, we pay off our debts in the hope that finally, once, when, if all debt is repaid, the present will be free for living life for its own sake. Thus, time is merely an empty means."
I love that quote. One thing that strikes me is if all debt is repaid, the present will be free for living life. There's this idea of obligation or being an employee or whatever it is. There's somehow I've got to pay off this debt so I can go live my life now.
Versus the foundation of experiencing the freedom to live life.
One word you used with me, Karen, was trust.
Yeah.
Trusting in time, learning to trust in time. That was very helpful. It has to do with trusting in God's providence, trusting in the Holy Spirit to be active in my life, and trusting the process that God has entered me into with this life. Trusting time. It's a very different outlook.
That is a different mindset for sure. Before we close here, Curtis, I just wanted to mention something really interesting I came across when I encountered a couple of philosophers on this topic. And one of them said, both of them were talking about how one way to really enter into time is with narrative, with story, both as a teller of story and a listener of story. One of them says, the person who's really able to tell stories and to listen to them has time and is able to be present in time. And they were talking about it in a couple different ways. First of all, as hearing narrative, hearing story as something that speaks to them in the moment. It's not something stuck in the past. It's not something way in the future, but it's a narrative that speaks to them in their present. So I was thinking, of course, of the narratives of scriptures and the power they have to really create concrete change and transformation in the present. And another way they were talking about narrative is, as an individual, in many ways, you're writing your own story in time. You're creating your own narrative. It's a way to access identity and meaning, is experiencing your story through time. Those were just a couple of intriguing approaches that I encountered.
I love that, Karen. Narrative. Now, how does that relate to time?
I think really it's an approach to how we participate in time. Is we encounter narratives, we encounter others in their narratives, and we encounter our own narrative as we experience the growth of our own identity in time.
That's fascinating to me because it's not only about, I guess, mindsets or mental constructs about narratives, but it's also about how we participate in time. I'm trusting in time, and I'm starting to see my story and the story of other people's, and we're caught up in these scriptural stories and themes all together.
Yeah. It's more like it's all unfolding in time and accessible in time.
Karen, we've talked about how we think about time and different ways we might think about time. I think the themes of trust and narrative are really jumping out to me as ways I can shift my perspective on time. And I really do think that we are caught up in our modern age of kind of an employee mentality because, most of us, we're employees.
Yeah.
And we have this idea that we're working for God. He's our employer, and we're maximizing our time to get the most value out of it for God's sort of the corporate God machine. It's a perspective that we're making God into our employer, and it drives some of our use of time as commodity. So the idea of a narrative or trust or other shifts really appeals to me.
Right. And maybe an alternative way of understanding it is my story unfolding in time has the possibility of being caught up into God's narrative, become part of this bigger, broader, expansive narrative in which we're going somewhere with purpose.
Yeah, all things work to the glory of God for those that love him. Thanks for participating in the Catholic Midlife Podcast, participating, sharing your time with us. The new year makes us think of all those, our stories and the unresolved plots and hopes that we have. And as coaches, something we do is we help bring those forward into the light and help people get going on their narratives. You can always reach out to us at thecatholicmidlife@gmail.com to learn more. We'd love to talk to you. Thanks for being here with us. The Catholic Midlife Podcast is for anyone that wants to receive the abundance of life that God has for each one of us. Take a moment right now to tell a friend about us.